Picture this. A father stands before television cameras, tears streaming down his face, begging for his family's safe return. His voice cracks as he pleads with his missing wife and two young children to come home. The nation watches, hearts breaking for this desperate man. But here's the thing, those tears? Completely fake. Because that father already knew exactly where his family was. He'd put them there himself. This is the story of Noah Alberts, a man so consumed by narcissism that when his wife dared to file for divorce, he didn't just walk away. He chose something far more sinister. In August 2023, in a quiet Austin suburb, Noah bludgeoned his wife to death, strangled his 7-year-old son, and smothered his 8-month-old daughter. Then he spent an entire week performing grief for the cameras while their bodies lay submerged in a retention pond. This is a story about control, deception, and the darkest depths of human evil hiding behind an ordinary face. Before we dive into this devastating story, I want to ask you to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Cases like these need to be told, not for shock value, but so we can recognize the warning signs and potentially save lives. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And if you find this video valuable, share it with someone who might benefit from understanding these red flags. The call came in at 9:47 p.m. on a hot August night in Austin, Texas. The kind of night where the heat doesn't break even after sunset, where the air feels thick and oppressive. On the other end of the line, a man's voice trembled with what seemed like panic. His name was Noah Alberts, and he was reporting that his wife and two children were missing. Now, if you've ever watched true crime, you know that 911 dispatchers are trained to pick up on things most people would miss. They listen not just to what's being said, but how it's being said. And something about Noah's voice immediately struck the dispatcher as off. The panic seemed rehearsed, like he was reading from a script rather than experiencing genuine terror. "My wife, she's gone," Noah said, his words tumbling out in what should have been frantic disorder. "Her car's in the driveway. Her purse is on the counter, but Tiffany's not here. Neither are the kids. Jonathan and Dileia, they're gone. All of them are just gone." The dispatcher kept him on the line, asking careful questions. What had he touched? What had he moved? Had his wife mentioned going anywhere? She was buying time for the officers already racing toward the Austin address. And with each answer Noah gave, her suspicions deepened. His pauses were too calculated. His emotions seemed to turn on and off like a switch. When officers James Chen and Maria Rodriguez arrived at 10:03 p.m., they found Noah standing in the driveway. His posture was slumped, his face buried in his hands, the picture of despair. But when he looked up at them, both officers would later testify to the same chilling detail. His eyes were completely dry. No tears, no redness, nothing. The house itself told a story that didn't match Noah's narrative. There were no signs of forced entry, no indication of struggle, nothing overturned or disturbed. It looked like a normal evening had been interrupted, except that 3 people had simply vanished into thin air. Tiffany's purse sat on the kitchen counter. Jonathan's toys were scattered across the living room floor. The baby's bottle rested by the sink. Everything was too ordinary. Officer Rodriguez began questioning Noah while Chun conducted a sweep of the home. And this is where things get interesting. Noah claimed he'd left for work at his usual time, around 7:30 a.m., spent the entire day at his job as a regional manager at a construction supply company, and returned home at 9:30 p.m. to find everyone gone. His timeline seemed straightforward enough, but Rodriguez noticed something peculiar. He kept checking his watch, kept glancing toward the garage, and he had this habit of touching his neck in what looked like a self-soothing gesture. "Did your wife mention any plans to go anywhere?" Rodriguez asked, watching Noah's face carefully. "No, nothing," Noah answered immediately, too immediately. "She was supposed to be home with the kids. She never goes anywhere without telling me." Did you catch that? She never goes anywhere without telling me. Not without letting me know, or without mentioning it. The emphasis was on control, on the idea that Tiffany needed his permission to leave the house. Rodriguez filed that detail away in her mental notes. Upstairs, Officer Chun was making some disturbing discoveries of his own. Jonathan's room showed signs of recent activity. Toys out, bed unmade, the normal chaos of a 7-year-old's life. But the baby's nursery? It felt staged. The crib was made with hospital corners, as if no infant had slept there recently. Everything was too perfect, too arranged. The master bedroom was even more revealing. Dresser drawers hung slightly open. There were gaps in the closet where clothes had been removed. And in the bathroom trash can, Chun found crumpled tissues with mascara stains. These weren't the signs of a sudden, unexpected disappearance. They looked like the remnants of deliberate packing, of tears shed in preparation, or aftermath. When Shin asked Noah if Tiffany had been upset about anything recently, the man's entire demeanor changed. His face flushed. His jaw tightened. Through clenched teeth, he said, she was being dramatic about nothing. Just her hormones from having the baby. There it was again, blame shifting. Dismissiveness. A suggestion that whatever was wrong was Tiffany's fault, not his. As the night wore on and more officers arrived to canvass the neighborhood, Noah's performance began to crack. He initially refused to call Tiffany's parents, claiming he didn't want to worry them unnecessarily. But when pressed, he made the call with all the warmth of someone ordering takeout. He started suggesting that maybe Tiffany had run off. Maybe she was overwhelmed. Maybe she wasn't cut out for motherhood. Each statement subtly shifted blame onto the missing woman while positioning himself as the concerned, beleaguered husband. And here's what's crucial. When asked about recent arguments, Noah admitted they'd been having some issues, but characterized them as minor marital disputes. He never mentioned the divorce papers Tiffany had served him just 72 hours earlier. That omission? That was a lie by exclusion, and it would later prove critical to understanding his motive. At 11:34 p.m., Detective Marcus Turner arrived at the scene. Turner was a 15-year veteran with a particular expertise in domestic cases, and the responding officers had called him in because something about this situation had set off every alarm bell they had. Turner took one look at Noah Alberts and felt his instincts trigger. The man's effect was all wrong. Too composed in some moments, too theatrical in others, never landing on genuine emotion that rang true. Turner introduced himself, shook Noah's hand, and immediately noted that the palm was completely dry, despite the Texas summer heat. Despite the supposed emotional distress, dry as bone. He began asking the same questions the officers had posed, but this time he was watching for something specific. The micro-expressions that betrayed deception, the shifts in story that indicated rehearsal rather than recall. And Noah was giving him plenty to work with. The timeline Noah provided was suspiciously devoid of specific details. He said he'd been at work all day, but he couldn't mention any particular meetings, clients, or phone calls that could verify his whereabouts. When Turner asked if he'd come home for lunch, Noah said no, too quickly, then added that he never came home during the workday. Never? That's a strong word. Turner filed it away, already planning to pull traffic camera footage and cell tower records. When Turner asked about life insurance, Noah hesitated, just for a fraction too long, before confirming they had policies. But he couldn't remember the amounts or when they'd been updated. For a regional manager, someone who presumably handled financial details regularly, that seemed odd. Turner made a mental note to subpoena those records immediately. But here's what really caught Turner's attention: the verb tenses. When Noah talked about his relationship with Tiffany, he kept speaking in past tense. She was a good mother. She loved those kids. Not is, but was. Not loves, but loved. Language that suggested finality rather than temporary absence. As the night stretched toward dawn, the Austin Police Department mobilized a full missing persons response. Patrol units checking hospitals and parks. Detectives reaching out to Tiffany's friends and family. 9 units preparing to search at first light. Noah seemed to welcome all this activity, playing his role of desperate husband. But Turner noticed something telling. Noah never asked the questions a truly worried spouse would ask. He didn't demand to know what more could be done. Didn't press for faster action. Didn't break down in genuine despair at the thought of his children in danger. Instead, he watched the police activity with the detached interest of someone observing a play, checking his performance against their reactions, adjusting his responses to match expectations. Turner had seen this before: guilty people trying to act innocent, following what they believed was the script without understanding that real emotion doesn't follow scripts. Real terror doesn't check its watch. Real grief doesn't worry about whether the tears look convincing enough. By the time the sun began to rise over Austin on August 16th, Turner had already made up his mind. This wasn't a missing persons case. This was a homicide investigation, and the person responsible was currently sitting in the living room, surrounded by concerned neighbors, playing the role of his life. The neighborhood was now crawling with police vehicles, news vans, and volunteers preparing to search. Turner had spent the remainder of the night reviewing initial reports and coordinating with various departments. But one thing kept nagging at him: Noah's absolute certainty about his whereabouts. His insistence that he'd been at work all afternoon felt less like truth and more like a prepared defense. Turner assembled his team in the makeshift command center set up in the driveway. He assigned tasks with the urgency that missing children demanded, but privately, he harbored a dark suspicion that this was already a recovery mission rather than a rescue. The canvassing began in earnest as the sun climbed higher. Officers went door to door, asking if anyone had seen Tiffany or the children, if anyone had noticed anything unusual. Most neighbors expressed shock, describing the Alberts as a quiet family. But several mentioned they'd heard raised voices from the house in recent weeks. One elderly woman 3 houses down said she thought she'd seen Noah's truck in the driveway the previous afternoon, which contradicted his claim of being at work all day, but she couldn't remember the exact time. The real breakthrough came from the house directly across the street, where a young couple named David and Jennifer Martinez had recently installed a Ring doorbell camera. When Turner knocked at 8:47 a.m., David answered, already aware of the situation from the police presence. Turner asked about their camera footage, and David immediately pulled up the app on his phone. The camera was positioned at an angle that captured not only their own front porch, but also a partial view of the Alberts' driveway and garage. David scrolled through the previous day's recordings, and when he reached approximately 2:30 p.m., he paused. What appeared on that screen would change everything. There, in crisp digital clarity, was Noah Albert's truck pulling into his driveway at exactly 2:28 p.m. Turner leaned in, his pulse quickening, as he watched Noah emerge from the truck, walk into the house, and return 18 minutes later carrying 2 large, dark-colored duffel bags. The bags were clearly heavy. Noah had to adjust his grip multiple times as he loaded them into the truck bed. His movements were deliberate and methodical, not the panic of someone dealing with a crisis, but the careful focus of someone executing a plan. At 2:32 p.m., Noah loaded the second bag, closed the tailgate, looked both ways down the street with paranoid caution, and climbed back into his truck. The vehicle reversed out and disappeared from view. Turner had found his smoking gun. Noah had claimed, repeatedly and with absolute certainty, that he'd been at work all afternoon, that he hadn't come home until 9:30 p.m. This video proved that was a lie. And those duffel bags? They were large enough to contain exactly what Turner feared they contained. The investigation had just shifted from missing persons to something far darker, and Noah Albert's perfect performance was about to fall apart. Detective Turner stood in the Martinez living room, watching that Ring camera footage for the 3rd time. Each viewing revealed new details that tightened the knot in his stomach. The way Noah checked the street before loading the bags. The visible strain in his posture as he carried them. The complete absence of Tiffany or the children in any frame. "Can you send me this footage immediately?" Turner asked, his voice tight with controlled urgency. David Martinez was already pulling up his email. Behind him, Jennifer stood with her hand over her mouth, realizing the significance of what they'd captured. Their security camera, installed just weeks earlier to catch package thieves, had instead documented what might be evidence of murder. Turner thanked them, instructed them to preserve the original footage, and told them not to discuss what they'd seen with anyone, especially not Noah Alberts. Then he radioed for backup to secure the Martinez home as a critical witness location. The timestamp, 2:32 p.m., burned in his mind because it destroyed Noah's alibi completely. Back at the command center, Turner moved quickly. He ordered officers to Noah's workplace to verify his alibi for the entire day while he personally began obtaining search warrants. The Ring footage constituted probable cause, but Turner wanted to build an airtight case before tipping his hand. He couldn't afford to let Noah know they were onto him. Not yet. He reviewed the video again and again, noting every detail. The size of those duffel bags. The way Noah had to use both hands to lift them. The quick, guilty glance around the neighborhood before loading them. This wasn't a man responding to an emergency. This was a man executing a plan he'd already thought through. Within 2 hours, detectives returned from Noah's workplace with information that further demolished his story. Yes, Noah had arrived at work around 7:30 a.m. and attended a morning meeting. But his supervisor confirmed that Noah had left the office at 1:45 p.m., claiming a family emergency and saying he'd work from home the rest of the day. Here's where it gets interesting. Noah had sent several work emails between 4 o'clock and 5 p.m., creating a digital trail that suggested he was working remotely. But the ring footage proved he'd been home during the exact window when those duffel bags were loaded. And get this, his truck's GPS, which the company tracked for all vehicles, had been disabled around 1:30 p.m. That required deliberate action. That suggested premeditation. The timeline was becoming crystal clear. Noah had left work citing an emergency, returned home when he knew Tiffany and the children would be there, and then loaded something heavy into his truck before resuming his digital workday. The question was, what was in those bags? Turner knew he needed to maintain the investigation's public appearance as a missing persons case while privately treating it as a homicide. It was a delicate balance, keeping Noah close without alerting him to the mounting evidence. He returned to the Alberts' home, where Noah was still surrounded by Tiffany's family who had arrived overnight. Her parents and sister were maintaining a vigil in the living room, their faces etched with worry. They had no idea they were sitting feet away from the man who destroyed their family. Turner pulled Noah aside for what he framed as a follow-up conversation. "I just need you to walk through yesterday one more time," he said casually. "Sometimes people remember additional details after the initial shock wears off." Noah stuck to his story. Work all day, never came home, arrived at 9:30 p.m. to find everyone gone. Each repetition of the false timeline was another nail in the coffin of his defense. "Did anyone see you at work during the afternoon?" Turner asked, as if merely clarifying details for his report. Noah nodded confidently, listing coworkers he'd supposedly interacted with. He had no idea that detectives were already interviewing those same people and finding his afternoon presence utterly unverified. The confidence in his voice was fascinating. He genuinely believed he'd covered his tracks perfectly. Turner thanked him and left, maintaining the impression that Noah was still viewed as a worried husband rather than the primary suspect. Outside, he briefed his team on the strategy going forward. "Maintain the search effort for the public and press," he said, "but focus investigative resources on Noah's movements, his financial records, his personal life. And most critically, find out what was in those duffel bags and where he took them." The search warrant for the Alberts' home was approved by a judge at 2:17 p.m. on August 16th. Crime scene investigators descended on the property under the guise of looking for clues to the family's disappearance. Noah was asked to stay with Tiffany's family at a hotel, a request he agreed to with feigned cooperation. What the CSI team found would turn suspicion into certainty. In the master bedroom, luminol revealed significant blood spatter patterns on the walls and carpet, despite obvious cleaning attempts. The distinctive spray pattern indicated blunt force trauma, multiple impacts. Someone had been beaten in that room, and whoever had done it had tried desperately to clean up the evidence. The bathroom showed traces of blood in the sink drain and tub. More cleanup efforts. The nursery's perfection now read as staging, an attempt to suggest baby Dileia had never been in danger, that she'd simply been taken away peacefully. In the garage, investigators found recently purchased cleaning supplies, bleach, heavy-duty trash bags, rubber gloves. The receipts were time-stamped to August 14th, 2023, the day before the family disappeared. Noah had been shopping for murder supplies while his children played upstairs. When they finally examined Noah's truck under warrant at his workplace parking lot, they found fiber evidence in the bed matching the carpet from the master bedroom. There were also faint traces of blood that had survived his cursory cleaning attempt. But the most damning piece of evidence was a single child's hair caught in the truck bed's tie-down ring. DNA analysis would later confirm it belonged to 7-year-old Jonathan. Each piece of evidence built a narrative of calculated violence, cleanup, and disposal. But Turner knew that without bodies, the case remained circumstantial. He needed to find where Noah had gone after loading those duffel bags at 2:32 p.m. Cell tower data, obtained through emergency warrants, showed Noah's phone pinging towers in a pattern that led southeast from the residential neighborhood toward the industrial area where his workplace was located. But there was a significant detour, a route that took him off the main road. The towers placed him near a series of retention ponds that served the commercial development in that area. Large, man-made bodies of water designed for stormwater management. Deep, murky, perfect for hiding something you never wanted found. Turner deployed search teams to those locations immediately. Every hour that passed increased the possibility of evidence degradation, and if bodies were in those ponds, time was critical. As officers and volunteers prepared to search the murky waters, Turner couldn't shake the image from the ring footage. Noah's deliberate movements, his careful surveillance of the street, his methodical loading of those heavy bags. The media descended on the case with voracious intensity. By August 17th, the story had reached national attention. Family of three vanishes from Austin suburb ran on every cable news network, showing photos of Tiffany's warm smile, Jonathan's gap-toothed grin, and baby Dileia's tiny face. What the public saw was a desperate search for an innocent family. What they didn't see was Turner's team methodically building a case against the man at the center of it all. And then Noah made his first televised appeal. On the morning of August 18th, he stood before a cluster of microphones outside the Austin Police Department headquarters. He wore a wrinkled button-down shirt, his hair disheveled in calculated disarray, his face carrying the shadow of strategic stubble that suggested sleepless nights. "Tiffany, if you're watching this, please come home," he said, his voice cracking on cue. "Jonathan, Dileia, Daddy loves you so much. We just want you home safe." The performance was masterful. It hit every note the public expected. News anchors praised his strength. Social media rallied around him. Donations poured into a fund he'd established supposedly to aid the search efforts. Turner watched the press conference from his office, studying Noah's micro-expressions. The tears never reached his eyes, which remained focused and alert, scanning the crowd, gauging reactions. His body language showed none of the collapse that genuine grief produces. His shoulders remained square, his spine straight, his gestures controlled and purposeful. When a reporter asked if he had any idea what might have happened, Noah's response came too smoothly. "I just don't understand it. Tiffany was a wonderful mother. We had our struggles like any couple, but I never thought she'd just leave. Maybe she was overwhelmed. Maybe she needed space. I just pray she's keeping our babies safe." There it was again, the subtle shift of blame onto Tiffany. The suggestion that she'd left voluntarily. The implication that she might have been unstable. Each word was a calculated attempt to control the narrative. Behind the scenes, Turner's investigation was systematically dismantling Noah's carefully constructed facade. And one of the most damning discoveries came from Tiffany's best friend, Rachel Morrison. Rachel came forward on August 18th with information that painted a very different picture of the Alberts' marriage. She told detectives that Tiffany had discovered Noah was having an affair with a 24-year-old coworker named Ashley Chen. The affair had been ongoing for at least 4 months. When Tiffany confronted Noah on August 12th, just 3 days before she disappeared, he'd initially denied it, then admitted it, then tried to minimize it. Rachel provided text messages where Tiffany described her devastation, her plans to divorce Noah, and her fear of his reaction. In one message, dated August 13th, Tiffany wrote, "He got really quiet when I mentioned custody. He told me I'd never keep his kids from him. Rachel, I'm scared." The affair provided motive. But what Turner discovered next elevated the case to another level of premeditation. On August 3rd, 2023, just 12 days before the family disappeared, Noah had contacted their insurance agent and increased Tiffany's life insurance policy from $100,000 to $750,000. The agent, interviewed under warrant, confirmed that Noah had initiated the increase, claiming he wanted better protection for the family now that they had 2 children. Think about that timeline. August 3rd, increased the life insurance. August 12th, Tiffany serves divorce papers. August 15th, Tiffany and the children disappear. Turner now had the complete motive triangle. The affair that threatened Noah's marriage, the divorce papers that threatened his control, and the life insurance policy that promised financial gain while eliminating the problem of alimony and child support. But motive alone wouldn't secure a conviction. Not without bodies. Not without absolute proof that Tiffany, Jonathan, and Dileia were dead rather than missing. The search of the retention ponds continued through August 19th and 20th. Divers working in murky water, searching muddy bottoms for any sign of the missing family. After 2 days, they'd found nothing. The ponds were large, the visibility poor, and Turner felt the pressure mounting. Then, on August 22nd, everything changed. While search teams scoured retention ponds and Noah continued his media performances, Detective Turner's team was uncovering the double life Noah Alberts had been living. And what they found painted a picture of a man for whom deception wasn't just a strategy, it was a way of life. Ashley Chen was 24 years old, bright-eyed, and ambitious when she started working in Noah's office. She'd later tell detectives that Noah had been charming from the start, attentive, complimentary, making her feel seen in ways her previous relationships never had. He'd mentioned having kids, but described his marriage as essentially over, just waiting for the right time to leave. The affair had started in April 2023, about 4 months before the murders. Bank records showed Noah making cash withdrawals of $300 every week, amounts that corresponded with hotel meetings with Ashley. Credit card statements revealed purchases at jewelry stores, restaurants, and Victoria's Secret. None of these gifts had gone to Tiffany. Text messages recovered from Ashley's phone, provided under subpoena, showed Noah's true feelings about his family. He called Tiffany controlling and difficult. He complained about being trapped by child support and custody arrangements. In one message from July, he'd written, "Jonathan's getting more expensive every year. School, activities, everything. It's like having a second mortgage." About his infant daughter, he'd written, "Another 18 years of payments I didn't plan for." Think about that. He wasn't talking about a child he loved. He was talking about a financial obligation, a burden, an expense line on a budget he wanted to eliminate. But here's what's chilling. The text stopped abruptly on August 14th, the day before the murders. Noah's last message to Ashley read, "Taking care of things. We'll explain soon. Love you. Taking care of things." 5 words that would later be introduced at trial as evidence of premeditation. Ashley would testify that she'd assumed he meant filing for divorce, maybe having a difficult conversation with Tiffany. She had no idea what taking care of things actually meant. Meanwhile, Tiffany had been living her own nightmare. Friends and family described a woman who'd been vibrant and happy early in the marriage, but who'd gradually become more isolated and anxious. Noah had slowly cut her off from her support system, complaining when she spent time with friends, questioning her about where she'd been, checking her phone and email. Classic controlling behavior. Classic signs of an abusive relationship. But like so many victims, Tiffany had rationalized it. He was stressed about work. He just worried about her. He loved her and wanted them to be close. Rachel Morrison, Tiffany's best friend since college, told detectives that Tiffany had confided in her about the affair on August 12th, the same day she'd discovered it. Tiffany had found text messages on Noah's phone while he was in the shower. Messages that made it clear this wasn't just an emotional affair. It was physical, ongoing, and serious. She was devastated, Rachel said, her voice shaking during her interview. Not just because he cheated, but because of how he'd talked about her and the kids in those messages. He'd called Jonathan the mistake that keeps costing me. Can you imagine reading that about your own child? Tiffany had confronted Noah that evening. According to her text messages to Rachel, sent later that night, the confrontation had been explosive at first, Noah denying, then admitting, then trying to minimize. But what had frightened Tiffany most was how he'd changed when she mentioned divorce and custody. He got really quiet, Tiffany had texted. Not angry anymore. Just cold. Like he was calculating something. When I said I'd file for primary custody and child support, he looked at me with this expression I'd never seen before. It scared me, Rachel. I'm taking the kids to my parents this weekend. That weekend never came. On August 12th, Tiffany had visited an attorney's office and filed for divorce. The papers cited irreconcilable differences and adultery. She was seeking primary physical custody of both children, with Noah having standard visitation. She was also requesting child support calculated according to Texas guidelines, which for Noah's income would have been substantial. The divorce papers were served to Noah at his workplace on August 12th, the same day Tiffany discovered the affair. He'd signed for them at 3:47 p.m., according to the process server's records. Coworkers would later testify that Noah had seemed stunned, then angry, then eerily calm after receiving the papers. One coworker, Marcus Williams, told detectives that Noah had said, "She thinks she can just take my kids and make me pay? She's got another thing coming." At the time, Williams had assumed it was just angry bluster from a man whose marriage was ending. Now, those words took on a sinister significance. Let's talk about the life insurance for a moment, because this is where Noah's planning becomes undeniable. On August 3rd, 9 days before Tiffany discovered the affair and 12 days before she disappeared, Noah had called their insurance agent, Linda Foster, to discuss updating their coverage. He'd been smooth and reasonable, explaining that with 2 children now, they needed better protection. What if something happened to one of them? Linda had recommended they both increase their coverage, but Noah had insisted on focusing on Tiffany's policy first. She's home with the kids more, he'd said. If something happened to her, I'd need resources for childcare, maybe have to cut back my hours. Let's make sure she's well covered. It had seemed like thoughtful, responsible financial planning. Linda had processed the increase from $100,000 to $750,000, and the policy had gone into effect on August 7th. Noah had called twice after that to confirm the policy was active. Unusual, but not unheard of for someone who liked to be thorough. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, it looked like exactly what it was: a man setting up a financial motive for murder. Turner also discovered that Noah had been researching things on his work computer that he'd apparently assumed weren't being monitored. The IT department requested to pull Noah's search history, found queries from early August that made Turner's blood run cold. How to disable GPS tracker vehicle, best ways to hide evidence, how long does DNA evidence last, retention pond depth Austin area. There was also a particularly damning search from August 10th. Can life insurance deny claim suspicious death? Noah had apparently been researching whether his plan would work, whether the insurance company would pay out if Tiffany's death seemed suspicious. The pattern was clear. Noah had been planning this for weeks, possibly longer. The affair had made him want out. The divorce papers had made him realize that out would cost him, both financially and in terms of his image. He was too narcissistic to accept being seen as a divorced dad paying child support, too calculating to let Tiffany take his children and his money. So he decided on a different solution: murder his family, collect the insurance money, and play the grieving widower for the cameras. In Noah's twisted logic, it probably seemed like a perfect plan. Noah had even asked a coworker, Danny Rodriguez, about fishing spots in the area, claiming he wanted to take Jonathan fishing sometime. Are those retention ponds near the industrial park any good? He'd asked. They look pretty deep. Danny had shrugged, said he didn't know, didn't fish much. He thought nothing of the conversation until detectives interviewed him weeks later. Then it clicked. Noah had been scouting disposal locations. As Noah continued his media appearances through August 20th and 21st, his performance evolved. Each interview was more theatrical than the last. On a national morning show, he spoke about his children with a careful detail that actually revealed his fundamental disconnection from their lives. He described Jonathan as a good kid who liked toys, without mentioning his son's obsession with Paw Patrol, his love of drawing dinosaurs, or his habit of making up elaborate stories. He called Dileia a sweet baby, without noting her distinctive laugh, her hatred of green vegetables, or the way she grabbed at her mother's hair. These were generic descriptions any stranger could have provided, not the intimate knowledge of a father who'd been present in his children's daily lives. The Austin community rallied around the case, organizing candlelight vigils and continued search efforts. At a vigil on August 21st, held in the park where Jonathan had often played, Noah stood at the front holding a candle, his head bowed. But his eyes kept scanning the crowd, watching the news cameras, ensuring his grief was being properly documented. Tiffany's family stood nearby, her mother sobbing openly, her father's face etched with genuine anguish. The contrast between their raw emotion and Noah's controlled display couldn't have been more stark. Several attendees would later tell police they'd felt unsettled by Noah's demeanor, sensing something performative rather than authentic. While Noah played his role for the cameras, Turner's team continued uncovering evidence of his double life. They found that Noah had taken Ashley to the same restaurants where he'd taken Tiffany on early dates. He'd given Ashley a necklace nearly identical to one he'd given Tiffany for their anniversary. Even his words of affection were recycled. Text messages to Ashley using the same phrases he'd once used with Tiffany. It was as if Noah viewed people as interchangeable props in the story of his life. Tiffany had served her purpose, given him children, maintained his home, provided the appearance of a stable family man. But when she'd stopped being useful, when she'd started demanding things from him, she'd become disposable. And the children? They were never people to him. They were obligations, expenses, obstacles to the life he wanted with Ashley, where he could be the successful bachelor again, unencumbered by the messy reality of family life. Ashley Chen would later struggle with enormous guilt, telling investigators through tears that she'd never suspected Noah was capable of violence. She'd seen him as charming, successful, a little controlling perhaps, but not dangerous. If she'd known what he was planning, what he was capable of, she never would have continued the relationship. But that's the thing about narcissists like Noah. They're expert at compartmentalization. Ashley saw the version of Noah he wanted her to see: attentive, romantic, unfairly trapped in a bad marriage. Tiffany saw a different version: controlling, dismissive, increasingly cold. His coworkers saw yet another version: professional, competent, slightly arrogant. None of them saw the real Noah, the man who could bludgeon his wife to death, strangle his 7-year-old son, smother his infant daughter, and then spend a week crying fake tears for television cameras. That man was about to be revealed to the world. Because on August 22, 2023, a groundskeeper at a commercial park near Noah's workplace was cleaning debris from a retention pond when he spotted something that would break the case wide open. The morning of August 22nd started like any other for Miguel Santos, a groundskeeper who maintained the commercial park near the industrial district. He'd been working this route for 3 years, knew every retention pond, every pathway, every drainage system in the area. It was routine work: picking up trash, clearing debris, maintaining the landscaping that made the commercial park look professional. But that morning, as he was cleaning debris from retention pond C, something caught his eye. Something colorful floating near the bank, partially tangled in the algae and weeds. At first, he thought it was just more trash. People threw all kinds of things into these ponds. But as he got closer, he realized it was a small backpack, blue and red, with cartoon characters, Paw Patrol characters. Miguel had been following the news. Everyone in Austin had been following the news about the missing family, the 3 faces plastered on every screen and billboard. And he recognized that backpack immediately. It had been shown in dozens of news reports as belonging to 7-year-old Jonathan Alberts. His hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone and dialed 911. Within minutes, Retention Pond C was swarmed with police. Crime scene investigators arrived, followed by the dive team that had been searching other ponds for the past 3 days. Detective Turner pulled up at 2:43 p.m., looked at that soggy backpack with its cheerful cartoon characters, and felt his heart sink even as his investigative mind kicked into high gear. This was Jonathan's backpack, the one he took everywhere, and its presence in this pond meant the search had just become a recovery operation. The dive team entered the water at 3:47 p.m., working methodically in a grid pattern. The retention pond was about 15 feet deep at its center, the water murky with sediment and algae. Visibility was terrible, the divers essentially working blind, feeling their way along the muddy bottom. At 4:23 p.m., a diver surfaced and signaled. His voice was tight with emotion as he reported finding something: a large duffel bag, weighted down with concrete blocks. The bag was carefully retrieved, lifted from the water with heartbreaking care. Crime scene investigators spread tarps on the bank before opening it, knowing what they were about to find, but hoping somehow they were wrong. They weren't wrong. Inside the bag was the body of Tiffany Alberts. Her hands were bound with zip ties. Her skull showed evidence of massive blunt force trauma, the kind of injuries that come from being struck repeatedly with a heavy object. The medical examiner would later confirm she'd been hit at least 5 to 7 times, each blow delivered with enough force to fracture her skull. Turner stood at the edge of the pond, watching as the body was processed and photographed. He thought about Noah standing in front of cameras, begging for his family's safe return. Noah had known exactly where Tiffany was the entire time, had dumped her in this retention pond after beating her to death in their bedroom, had weighted the bag to keep her submerged, and then had spent a week pretending to search for her. The dive team went back into the water. If Tiffany was here, the children were likely here too. The thought made everyone at the scene feel physically ill, but they pressed on. These bodies needed to be recovered. This family deserved to be brought home. At 6:15 p.m., as the sun began to set over Austin, a second duffel bag was located approximately 30 feet from the first. The divers' movements were slow and reverent as they brought it to the surface. This bag was smaller, and everyone knew what that meant before it was even opened. Inside, wrapped together as if in sleep, were the small bodies of Jonathan and baby Dileia. Jonathan showed signs of strangulation, ligature marks around his neck. But there was also head trauma, suggesting Noah had knocked him unconscious first, perhaps so the boy wouldn't fight back. It was a small mercy in an otherwise merciless crime. Baby Dileia, just 8 months old, had been smothered. The autopsy would later reveal this was the quietest death, but perhaps the most horrifying in its intimacy. Smothering an infant requires sustained pressure, deliberate action, a choice renewed moment by moment as the baby struggles for air. Noah had looked at his 8-month-old daughter and made that choice. The scene was devastating. Professional investigators, people who'd seen terrible things in their careers, had to turn away to compose themselves before continuing their work. One CSI technician, a mother herself, quietly wept as she photographed Dileia's tiny body. Turner stood at the edge of the pond as the bodies were processed and prepared for transport to the medical examiner. The calculation required to commit these murders was staggering. The coldness, the absolute absence of remorse or humanity. Noah hadn't just killed in a moment of rage. He'd planned it, executed it, cleaned up afterward, and then performed grief for the cameras. He'd viewed his wife and children not as people, but as obstacles to be eliminated. And that level of malignant narcissism, that fundamental inability to see others as fully human, was exactly what made him so dangerous. As the sun set on August 22nd, news of the discovery began to leak. By nightfall, every major news outlet was reporting that 3 bodies had been recovered from a retention pond in Austin. The story that had begun as missing family was now officially family annihilation. The grieving husband was about to become the accused murderer. The discovery of the bodies transformed the case from missing persons to triple homicide, and the Austin Police Department moved with swift precision. Detective Turner coordinated with the district attorney's office as the medical examiner began preliminary examinations at the scene. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, the chief medical examiner, worked under portable lights as night fell. Her initial findings were grim, but crucial for the arrest warrant. Tiffany's injuries indicated she'd been struck multiple times with a heavy object, the pattern consistent with a tire iron. Jonathan's small body showed ligature marks around his neck, but also a blow to the head that had likely rendered him unconscious first. Baby Dileia had been smothered, probably with a pillow or blanket. The estimated time of death, based on decomposition and stomach contents, placed all 3 murders in a window between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. on August 15th, exactly when Noah had been home on his family emergency leave from work, exactly when the Ring camera had captured him loading duffel bags into his truck. The arrest warrant was signed by Judge Patricia Coleman at 9:34 p.m. on August 22nd, charging Noah Alberts with 3 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances, making him eligible for the death penalty under Texas law. Turner personally led the arrest team to the hotel where Noah was staying with Tiffany's family. They'd maintained the fiction of the grieving husband even as the dive team was pulling his victims from the water. Now that fiction was about to end. When Turner knocked on the hotel room door at 10:15 p.m., Noah answered wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt. His face was arranged in an expression of hopeful concern, as if expecting news about the search. Maybe they'd found a lead. Maybe there was good news. "Noah Alberts," Turner said, his voice flat and professional. "You're under arrest for the murders of Tiffany Alberts, Jonathan Alberts, and Dileia Alberts." The color drained from Noah's face. His carefully maintained facade cracked for the first time as the reality of his situation crashed through his denial. For just a moment, Turner saw genuine emotion in Noah's eyes, not remorse, but fear. The fear of a narcissist realizing his control had slipped away. Noah's arrest made national headlines by midnight. The news spread across social media with shocking speed as the story shifted from mystery to murder, from sympathetic husband to accused killer. The tearful interviews that had garnered Noah so much public support now became evidence of his deception. News outlets began replaying his performances with new context, highlighting the fake tears, the controlled emotions, the subtle blame he'd placed on Tiffany. The public reaction was swift and visceral. People who'd donated to his fund felt betrayed. Those who'd organized searches felt manipulated. The Austin community reeled from the revelation that the man they'd been supporting had likely murdered his family in cold blood. The candlelight vigils shifted from prayers for safe return to memorials for the dead, from hope to mourning, from searching to grieving. The Austin Police Department held a press conference at 7 a.m. on August 23rd. Chief Rebecca Walsh stood before a sea of reporters and cameras to announce what everyone had already heard through the rumor mill but needed to hear officially. Yesterday evening, the bodies of Tiffany Alberts, Jonathan Alberts, and Dileia Alberts were recovered from a retention pond in southeast Austin, Chief Walsh stated, her voice carrying the weight of the tragedy. Following a thorough investigation by our detective division, Noah Alberts has been arrested and charged with their murders. This is an ongoing investigation, and we will not be able to comment on specific evidence at this time. The chief's words were measured and professional, but the grief in her eyes reflected the emotions of every officer who'd worked the case. Every detective who'd watched Noah lie to their faces while his children's bodies lay submerged just miles away. Behind the scenes, the evidence against Noah was overwhelming. The ring camera footage, the GPS data placing him at the retention pond, the financial records revealing the increased life insurance, the text messages documenting his affair and his resentment of his family, the forensic evidence from the master bedroom, Jonathan's hair in the truck bed. But Turner knew that between arrest and conviction lay the treacherous path of building a prosecutable case, one that would withstand defense attacks and convince a jury beyond reasonable doubt. The investigation shifted into its second phase, from finding the victims to building an ironclad case. Turner worked with Assistant District Attorney Diana Stewart to ensure every piece of evidence was properly documented, every witness interview thorough, every legal requirement meticulously followed. Noah's arraignment was scheduled for August 25th, giving prosecutors 2 days to organize their case and prepare for the defense's likely arguments. In that time, forensic evidence continued pouring in. The medical examiner confirmed that Tiffany had died from blunt force trauma consistent with the tire iron found in Noah's workplace locker. Jonathan's cause of death was strangulation combined with head trauma. Dileia's was asphyxiation. The timeline of death, based on stomach contents and decomposition, placed all 3 murders in that window between 2 o'clock and 4 p.m. on August 15th, exactly when Noah had been home, exactly when he'd disabled his truck's GPS, exactly when he'd loaded those duffel bags. The duffel bags themselves matched ones Noah had purchased at a sporting goods store on August 14th, his credit card providing an indisputable receipt. The concrete blocks used to weight the bags were traced to a hardware store where Noah had paid cash on August 13th, but security footage confirmed his presence and purchase. Each piece of evidence formed a link in an unbreakable chain of premeditation, execution, and cover-up. As August 25th approached, the Austin community prepared for Noah's first court appearance. The grieving families prepared to face the man who destroyed their lives. And Noah, sitting in a jail cell, apparently still believed he could talk his way out of this. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. Noah Albert sat across from Detective Turner in interview room 3 of the Austin Police Department headquarters on August 23rd. Less than 12 hours had passed since his arrest, and his posture still showed traces of the confidence that had carried him through a week of lying to the world. He'd been read his Miranda rights. And then, in what Turner suspected was a catastrophic overestimation of his own intelligence, Noah had waived his right to an attorney. He actually believed he could talk his way out of this. The room was deliberately sparse. Walls painted institutional beige. A metal table bolted to the floor. Cameras recording from multiple angles. Turner sat with a thick folder of evidence before him, ready to systematically dismantle every lie Noah had constructed. "Noah, I want to give you a chance to tell your side of what happened," Turner began, his voice neutral and professional. Noah leaned back in his chair, arms crossed defensively, and began repeating the same story he'd told the media. He'd been at work, came home to find them gone, had no idea what happened. Turner listened patiently, letting Noah commit to the narrative one more time. Then he opened the folder and pulled out a still image from the ring camera footage. "Noah, this is video from your neighbor's security camera. Timestamped 2:32 p.m. on August 15th. That's you loading duffel bags into your truck." Turner slid the image across the table. "You told me you were at work all afternoon. This video shows that was a lie." The color drained from Noah's face as he stared at the image. You could actually see his mind racing, trying to construct a new explanation, a revised story that could account for this evidence. I did come home for a minute," he stammered, his confidence evaporating. "I forgot something for work." I must have been confused about the timeline. Turner nodded as if accepting this, then produced the GPS records from Noah's company truck. Your truck's GPS was disabled at 1:30 p.m., Noah. That requires deliberate action. Why would you disable it? Noah's eyes darted to the door, to the camera, back to Turner. Trapped. I don't know. Maybe it malfunctioned. The weakness of the excuse hung in the air between them. Turner pressed forward, producing the purchase records for the duffel bags, the concrete blocks, the cleaning supplies. You bought these bags the day before your family disappeared. You bought concrete blocks 2 days before. You increased Tiffany's life insurance to $750,000 12 days before she died. Turner's voice remained calm, but his eyes were hard. Noah, these aren't coincidences. This is planning. Noah's facade was cracking faster now. His breathing quickened. His hands fidgeted with the edge of his shirt. The careful composure he'd maintained for cameras and interviews was dissolving under the weight of irrefutable evidence. I want a lawyer, he finally said. But the damage was done. His initial waiver of rights, his attempted explanations, his visible panic when confronted with evidence, all of it had been recorded and would be used against him. Turner stood, gathered his evidence, and left Noah alone in the interview room to contemplate the walls closing in around him. The interrogation footage would later be played at trial, jurors watching as Noah's carefully constructed lies fell apart in real time. Noah's arraignment on August 25, 2023, was a media spectacle. News helicopters circled the Travis County Courthouse. Protesters carrying signs demanding justice crowded the steps. Tiffany's family sat in the front row of the gallery, their faces etched with grief and determination. Noah entered the courtroom wearing an orange jumpsuit and restraints. His earlier confidence had been replaced by a hollow-eyed recognition that his situation was dire. Gone was the polished regional manager. Gone was the tearful husband. This was just a man in handcuffs, facing charges that could lead to his execution. Judge Patricia Coleman presided over the arraignment. Her reputation was built on fairness balanced by intolerance for courtroom theatrics. She read the charges in a clear, firm voice. Noah James Alberts, you are charged with 3 counts of capital murder in the deaths of Tiffany Marie Alberts, Jonathan Paul Alberts, and Dileia Grace Alberts. How do you plead? Noah's public defender, Thomas Brennan, stood and entered a plea of not guilty, the only real option at this stage. The judge set bail at $5 million, a largely symbolic amount given the severity of the charges and the flight risk Noah posed. Prosecutors requested he remain in custody without bail, citing the brutality of the crimes and the danger he posed to witnesses, particularly Ashley Chen, who'd been placed in protective custody after receiving threatening messages from Noah's supporters who still believed in his innocence. The wheels of justice had begun to turn, and they would grind slowly but inexorably toward judgment. The media coverage of Noah's arrest and arraignment was exhaustive. Legal analysts appeared on news programs to discuss the evidence, the likelihood of conviction, the possibility of the death penalty. The consensus was near universal. Noah was guilty, and the evidence was overwhelming. But public opinion, while powerful, doesn't determine legal outcomes. That would be up to a jury. And building a case strong enough to secure a death penalty conviction would require months of painstaking work. The prosecution team, led by Assistant District Attorney Diana Stewart, began constructing their trial strategy immediately. Stewart was a 20-year veteran known for meticulous preparation and success in securing convictions in the most difficult cases. She understood that while the evidence against Noah was overwhelming, securing a death penalty conviction required more than proof of guilt. It required convincing a jury that Noah represented such a fundamental threat to society that execution was the only appropriate response. She assembled a team of forensic experts, psychological professionals, and victim advocates, each bringing their expertise to constructing a narrative that would resonate with 12 ordinary citizens asked to make an extraordinary decision. The defense faced an uphill battle from the start. Thomas Brennan, overwhelmed by the media attention and the complexity of the case, requested additional counsel. The court appointed veteran defense attorney Robert Morrison to assist. Morrison had defended numerous capital cases and understood that saving Noah's life, not proving his innocence, was the realistic goal. His strategy would focus on mitigation, arguing that while Noah might be guilty, his childhood trauma, his mental health issues, his capacity for rehabilitation made him unsuitable for execution. The forensic evidence continued to mount through September and October 2023 as laboratories processed materials collected from the crime scene, Noah's truck, and his workplace. The tire iron found in his locker was confirmed as the murder weapon used on Tiffany. Her blood and hair found in microscopic traces despite aggressive cleaning attempts. Fibers from the duffel bags matched fibers from the master bedroom carpet, creating a direct link between the murder scene and the disposal site. Noah's DNA was found under Tiffany's fingernails, suggesting she'd fought back, struggled against the man she'd trusted and married. The image of Tiffany's final moments, awake, aware, fighting desperately as her husband beat her to death, haunted everyone who worked the case. Each piece of evidence was photographed, documented, and prepared for trial presentation. The prosecutors were building a case so comprehensive that every possible defense argument could be preemptively addressed. The psychological evaluation of Noah, conducted by Dr. Sarah Martinez, a forensic psychiatrist with expertise in narcissistic personality disorders, revealed a profile that chilled even experienced professionals. Noah showed all the hallmarks of malignant narcissism: grandiose sense of self-importance, lack of empathy, interpersonal exploitation, and beneath the surface charm, a rage at anyone who threatened his self-image. Dr. Martinez's report detailed how Noah viewed Tiffany and the children as extensions of himself rather than autonomous individuals. The divorce represented not just a practical problem, but a narcissistic injury so profound it triggered homicidal rage. The evaluation concluded that Noah posed an extreme danger to others and showed no capacity for genuine remorse or rehabilitation, making him an ideal candidate for the death penalty under Texas law. The discovery phase saw both prosecution and defense exchanging thousands of pages of documents. The prosecution's witness list was extensive: David Martinez with his ring footage, Ashley Chen with her testimony about the affair, Rachel Morrison describing Tiffany's fear, and dozens of forensic experts who would explain the DNA evidence, the blood spatter patterns, the timeline of death. The defense's witness list was shorter, focused on mental health experts who would argue for mitigation and family members who would testify to Noah's difficult childhood. Though even his own parents struggled to muster enthusiasm for defending their son's indefensible actions. Pre-trial hearings throughout late 2023 addressed numerous motions. The defense sought to suppress the ring camera footage, arguing it violated Noah's privacy. Judge Coleman ruled it was captured from a legal vantage point and showed public areas visible from the street. The defense challenged the admissibility of Noah's text messages with Ashley, claiming they were taken out of context. The judge allowed them as evidence of motive and state of mind. Each ruling chipped away at the defense's already limited options, the legal proceedings inexorably marching toward a trial that would determine whether Noah lived or died for his crimes. Throughout this period, Tiffany's family struggled with their grief while also preparing to testify. Carol Morrison, Tiffany's mother, would later describe this time as living in two worlds, one where she was planning her daughter's funeral, another where she was meeting with prosecutors to help build the case against her son-in-law. The community impacts of the case extended beyond individual families. The Austin Police Department implemented new training on recognizing family annihilation risk factors. The district attorney's office created a specialized domestic violence unit. Schools added education about healthy relationships and warning signs of abuse. Each change represented a small step toward preventing the next tragedy, society learning from horror and attempting to build safeguards against its repetition. As 2023 turned to 2024 and the trial date approached, the Austin community remained deeply invested in the case. The memorial for Tiffany, Jonathan, and Dileia was still maintained in the park where Jonathan had played. Flowers and teddy bears refreshed regularly by strangers who felt connected to the victims through shared humanity. Noah, meanwhile, sat in Travis County Correctional Complex in protective custody, isolated from the general population where child killers faced particular danger. Guards reported that he showed no emotion, made no statements of remorse, spent his time reading and watching television as if he were on an inconvenient vacation rather than facing trial for murdering his family. A psychiatrist brought in for preliminary evaluation found him to be narcissistic, manipulative, and completely lacking in genuine empathy. He could perform emotion when beneficial, but felt none authentically. The trial, scheduled to begin in March 2024, would be the culmination of months of investigation, preparation, and grief. A moment when justice would finally have its say in the matter of Noah Alberts and the family he destroyed. And everyone involved knew that the evidence was so overwhelming, the crime so heinous, that there could be only one outcome. The question wasn't whether Noah would be convicted. The question was whether he would spend the rest of his life in prison or die by lethal injection. That decision would soon be in the hands of 12 ordinary citizens asked to make an extraordinary judgment. March 11, 2024. Courtroom 3C of the Travis County Courthouse in Austin, Texas. The gallery was packed before dawn. Media representatives, victims' family members, and citizens who'd lined up for hours just for a chance to witness justice in action. When Judge Patricia Coleman entered at exactly 9 a.m., her black robes crisp and her expression grave, you could feel the weight of what was about to unfold. Noah sat at the defense table between his attorneys, wearing a suit his family had provided. His demeanor was strangely calm, almost disconnected, as if he were watching someone else's trial rather than fighting for his own life. The jury, 8 women and 4 men, selected after 2 weeks of voir dire, represented Austin's diverse demographics. Each had sworn they could consider both conviction and the death penalty if warranted by evidence. Assistant District Attorney Diana Stewart rose to deliver the prosecution's opening statement. She approached the jury box with purposeful movements, making eye contact with each juror before beginning. On August 15, 2023, in a quiet suburban home in Austin, Texas, Noah Alberts made a choice. She began, her voice clear and powerful. Faced with the consequences of his own actions, an affair exposed, a wife demanding divorce, children he'd have to support, he chose murder. She paused, letting the words sink in. Not impulsive violence born of passion, but calculated, premeditated annihilation of the 3 people who trusted him most in the world. Stewart walked the jury through the timeline systematically. The affair with Ashley Chen, Tiffany's discovery and decision to divorce. The life insurance increased 12 days before the murders. The purchase of duffel bags and concrete blocks in the days immediately preceding. The Ring camera footage capturing Noah loading those bags at 2:32 p.m. The GPS data placing him at the retention pond. The forensic evidence confirming Tiffany died from blunt force trauma in her own bedroom while her children were killed nearby. The evidence in this case is overwhelming, Stewart concluded, her voice dropping to an intimate register that drew the jurors in. Noah Alberts murdered his family to avoid the embarrassment of divorce and the financial burden of child support. He chose annihilation over alimony. And when you've heard all the evidence, we will ask you to hold him accountable by finding him guilty of capital murder and sentencing him to death. The defense's opening came from Robert Morrison, who faced the impossible task of humanizing a man accused of killing 2 children, one of them an infant. What Noah Alberts did was horrible, unconscionable, a tragedy that has devastated multiple families, Morrison acknowledged, surprising some observers with his candor. But this trial is about more than what happened. It's about who Noah Alberts is, how he came to commit these terrible acts, and whether executing him serves justice or simply satisfies our understandable desire for revenge. Morrison described Noah's difficult childhood, his undiagnosed mental health issues, his capacity for rehabilitation even in prison. The argument was pragmatic rather than emotional, recognizing that sympathy for Noah was impossible, but hoping to convince at least one juror that death was too extreme. The prosecution's case began with Officer Maria Rodriguez, one of the first responders to Noah's 911 call. Her description of that night set the tone for testimony to come. Rodriguez described Noah's dry eyes, his too perfect recitation of the timeline, the way he touched his neck in self-soothing gestures that suggested anxiety rather than grief. Under Stewart's direct examination, Rodriguez detailed every inconsistency she'd noted. Noah's claim of being at work all day, his suggestion that Tiffany had just left, his subtle shifts of blame onto his missing wife. The defense's cross-examination tried to suggest Rodriguez was reading too much into normal stress responses, but her years of experience and her detailed, contemporaneous notes made her testimony bulletproof. Detective Marcus Turner took the stand on the second day of trial. His testimony formed the backbone of the prosecution's narrative, walking the jury through the investigation from missing persons to homicide, from suspicion to certainty. Turner described obtaining the Ring camera footage, his first viewing of Noah loading those duffel bags. The way the timestamp destroyed Noah's alibi completely. Under Stewart's methodical questioning, Turner explained each investigative step: the GPS data, the cell tower records, the search of the retention ponds, and finally the heartbreaking discovery of Jonathan's Paw Patrol backpack floating in the water. His voice broke slightly when describing the recovery of the children's bodies. It was a genuine emotional response that resonated powerfully with jurors who'd begun seeing Turner as their guide through this terrible story. On the third day of trial, the Ring camera footage was played for the jury. The courtroom fell into absolute silence as the video showed Noah's truck pulling into the driveway. At 2:28 p.m., jurors leaned forward in their seats, watching Noah carry the first duffel bag with visible effort. His movements were deliberate and controlled. When the timestamp read 2:32 p.m. and Noah loaded the second bag, several jurors glanced at Noah at the defense table. Their expressions shifted from neutral attention to something harder, colder. The video's power was undeniable. This wasn't circumstantial evidence or expert interpretation. This was objective reality captured in digital clarity. Noah had been home when he claimed to be at work, had loaded heavy bags into his truck, had looked both ways, checking for witnesses. The defense had no effective cross-examination because the video spoke for itself. David Martinez, the neighbor whose camera had captured the crucial footage, testified briefly but impactfully about the moment he'd shown Detective Turner the video and realized its significance. Then came Ashley Chen. The courtroom atmosphere turned toxic as she described her affair with Noah, his complaints about being trapped by Tiffany and the children, his promises to leave his wife and start a new life. Chen, who'd been granted immunity in exchange for truthful testimony, wept openly as Stewart played recordings of text messages where Noah called Jonathan "the mistake that keeps costing me" and referred to Dileia as another 18 years of payments. You could see jurors recoil. These weren't just cold words. They were a window into how Noah viewed his own children, not as people he loved, but as financial obligations he resented. The forensic evidence consumed the second week of trial. Expert after expert took the stand to explain the scientific proof of Noah's guilt. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, the medical examiner, described Tiffany's injuries in clinical detail. Multiple skull fractures consistent with 5 to 7 blows from the tire iron. Defensive wounds on her hands where she tried to protect herself. The terror she must have experienced in her final moments. Jonathan's autopsy revealed he'd been struck unconscious before being strangled, a small mercy in an otherwise merciless crime. Baby Dileia's death by smothering was described with particular care, Dr. Hernandez explaining that this method required sustained pressure, deliberate action, a choice renewed moment by moment as the infant struggled for air. Several jurors were visibly shaken. One woman in the back row wiped away tears. This wasn't just forensic testimony. This was the brutal reality of what Noah had done to his own helpless children. The DNA evidence tied Noah irrefutably to the crime scenes. His skin cells under Tiffany's fingernails. His blood on the tire iron handle where he'd gripped it so hard he'd cut his own palm. His hair fibers in the duffel bags, mixed with those of his victims. The blood spatter expert, Dr. Michael Chen, used diagrams and photographs to show the jury the violence that had occurred in the master bedroom. The pattern of cast-off blood on the walls indicating repeated blows. The concentration of blood near the bed suggesting Tiffany had been attacked while sitting or lying down, possibly while she slept. Each technical detail built the irrefutable scientific case that Noah had murdered his family in their home exactly as charged. Tiffany's best friend, Rachel Morrison, provided the emotional testimony that brought the victim to life for the jury. She described a loving mother who adored her children, who'd been planning a future after divorce, who'd been frightened in her final days. Rachel read text messages from Tiffany, sent on August 14th, the day before her murder. "Noah's being so quiet. He's not arguing anymore. Just staring at me with this look I can't read. I'm scared, Rachel. I'm taking the kids to my parents this weekend." That weekend never came. Rachel's testimony connected the cold forensic evidence to the living, breathing woman who'd been stolen from the world. Tiffany became real to jurors who'd only known her as a victim, a friend, a daughter, a mother who'd loved her children and who'd died trying to protect them from a man she'd once trusted. The life insurance agent testified about Noah's August 3rd request to increase Tiffany's policy to $750,000, describing Noah's calm demeanor, his casual mention that with 2 children, they needed better protection. The agent's records showed Noah had called twice to confirm the policy was in effect before it actually was. Unusual behavior that suggested planning rather than prudent financial management. When Stewart asked if the agent had ever had a client murdered so soon after increasing their spouse's life insurance, he answered simply, "Never." As the prosecution rested its case after 2.5 weeks of testimony, the weight of evidence was crushing. Video proof of Noah's lies. Forensic proof of his violence. Testimony proving his motive. And above all, the bodies of 3 innocent victims recovered from where he'd dumped them. The defense had scored few points on cross-examination. They couldn't discredit the video, couldn't explain away the DNA, couldn't provide any alternative theory that made sense. Now they faced the impossible task of saving Noah's life without denying his guilt, a challenge that would test Morrison's considerable skills as they prepared to present their mitigation case. But everyone in that courtroom knew the truth. The evidence was overwhelming. The crimes were horrific. And Noah Alberts, sitting at the defense table with his carefully neutral expression, was guilty beyond any shadow of doubt. The only question remaining was whether he would spend the rest of his life in prison or die by lethal injection for what he'd done. That decision would come down to 12 ordinary people asked to make an extraordinary judgment about justice, punishment, and the value of human life. Even a life as irredeemably evil as Noah Alberts. The defense's case began on April 1st, 2024, with Robert Morrison calling Noah's mother, Patricia Alberts, to the stand. It was a strategic attempt to humanize the man the prosecution had successfully portrayed as a monster. Patricia was a thin woman in her early 60s who looked like she'd aged a decade in the months since her son's arrest. She took the oath with trembling hands, her reluctance evident in her hunched posture. Morrison gently questioned her about Noah's childhood. She described Noah's father as abusive, violent, prone to rages that left her and young Noah cowering in fear. She testified that Noah had witnessed his father beat her repeatedly, that the boy had tried to intervene and been beaten himself, that the household had been chaotic and traumatizing. Under Morrison's careful questioning, Patricia painted a picture of a child raised in dysfunction, never taught healthy emotional regulation, never shown appropriate expressions of love or anger. She described how Noah's father had abandoned the family when Noah was 12, leaving them financially destitute. The defense strategy was clear: establish that Noah's capacity for empathy had been damaged in childhood, that his narcissistic traits were survival mechanisms developed in trauma, that he was more broken than evil. Patricia's testimony was heartfelt and painful, but Stewart's cross-examination was devastating. "Mrs. Alberts, Noah has a younger sister, doesn't he?" Stewart asked. "Yes," Patricia answered quietly. "She was raised in the same environment, witnessed the same abuse." "Yes." "And where is she now?" Patricia's voice was barely audible. "She's a teacher. Married. Has 2 children of her own. She's never hurt anyone, has she? Never murdered her own children?" "No," Patricia whispered, tears streaming down her face. The point was made. Same environment. Different choices. Dr. James Richardson, a psychiatrist specializing in trauma and personality disorders, testified for the defense about Noah's psychological profile. He argued that Noah's narcissistic personality disorder was a direct result of childhood trauma and abuse. Richardson had evaluated Noah extensively, and his testimony walked the jury through the development of narcissistic defenses in children exposed to violence and abandonment. He described how Noah learned to suppress genuine emotion, how he developed grandiosity as protection against feelings of worthlessness. But the prosecution's cross-examination exposed the weakness of this strategy. "Dr. Richardson," Stewart asked pointedly, "did Noah's childhood trauma force him to disable his truck's GPS on August 15th? "No. But did his personality disorder make him buy concrete blocks to weight the bodies?" "It's more complex than, did his difficult upbringing compel him to cry fake tears on television while his children's bodies decomposed in a pond?" Richardson had no good answer. Each question highlighted Noah's deliberate choices, his conscious decisions to plan and execute murder. The defense called several other witnesses: Noah's high school guidance counselor, a prison administrator who testified about inmates adapting to prison life, more mental health experts arguing for mitigation. But none of it landed with the impact Morrison had hoped for. The jury had seen the evidence, had heard about Dileia being smothered, Jonathan being strangled, Tiffany fighting desperately for her life. No amount of childhood trauma could excuse that. Then, on April 8, 2024, against his attorney's strong advice, Noah Alberts decided to take the stand. He apparently believed that his intelligence and charm could sway the jury where evidence and expert testimony had failed. Morrison's direct examination was cautious, keeping Noah focused on his childhood trauma, his mental health struggles, his claim that he'd never intended to hurt anyone. Noah performed remorse with calculated precision. His voice broke at appropriate moments. His eyes glistened with tears that never quite fell. He described the day of the murders as a blur, claimed he'd blacked out, didn't remember the actual violence. Then came Diana Stewart's cross-examination. What followed was a masterclass in prosecution technique, systematically destroying every lie and exposing the narcissism beneath his performance. Mr. Alberts, you claim you blacked out during the murders. But do you remember disabling your GPS tracker that morning? Noah stumbled. That was different. You say you don't remember the violence, but you remember exactly where to dispose of the bodies? Noah's face flushed. I was in a fog. You testified that you loved your children, but you told Ashley Chen that Jonathan was the mistake that keeps costing me, didn't you? Noah tried to deny it, but the text message was projected on the screen behind him, his own words condemning him. Stewart continued her methodical dismantling. Mr. Alberts, when you increased Tiffany's life insurance to $750,000 on August 3rd, were you blacked out then? No. When you bought the duffel bags on August 14th, was that part of your dissociative state? I don't remember why when you cried for the cameras while your children's bodies were in a pond you put them in, were those real tears? And that's when Noah's mask finally fell completely. His face contorted with rage. Through clenched teeth, he snapped. She was going to take everything from me. She had no right. The courtroom erupted. Tiffany's family crying out. The judge calling for order. Noah's attorneys looking stricken at their client's self-destruction. In one unguarded moment of narcissistic rage, Noah had revealed his true motive, admitted his guilt, and shown the jury exactly who he was beneath the performance. Stewart, maintaining her professional composure despite the drama, asked quietly, "So you murdered your wife and children because you didn't want to lose control of them?" Noah, realizing his catastrophic mistake, tried to backtrack. "No, that's not what I meant." But the damage was done. The jury had seen the real Noah Alberts, the man beneath the performance. There was no walking that revelation back. The defense rested the next morning without calling further witnesses. Morrison knew that any attempt to repair the damage would only make it worse. The trial moved to closing arguments. Stewart rose to deliver a systematic summary that left no doubt about Noah's guilt or the appropriateness of the death penalty. Noah Alberts is not a victim of his childhood, his mental health, or his circumstances, she told the jury. He is a narcissist who viewed his family as possessions, who murdered them when they threatened to leave his control, who showed no remorse then and shows no genuine remorse now. She paused, making eye contact with each juror. The death penalty exists for cases exactly like this. Calculated murder of the most vulnerable. Children who trusted their father to protect them. An infant who couldn't even speak to beg for her life. Noah Alberts planned these murders, executed them, covered them up, and then performed grief for cameras. He deserves to die for what he did. Morrison's closing argument was the performance of a skilled attorney fighting a losing battle. He asked the jury to consider life imprisonment as sufficient punishment, argued that execution wouldn't bring back the victims, suggested that Noah's mental health issues warranted some degree of mercy. It was logical and well presented, but it couldn't overcome the mountain of evidence, Noah's own testimony, and the fundamental horror of what he'd done. The jury received the case on April 10, 2024. Judge Coleman provided detailed instructions on the elements of capital murder and the criteria for imposing the death penalty. The jury deliberated for 11 hours spread across 2 days. When they emerged on April 11th, 2024, the courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Tiffany's family in their usual front row seats. Noah at the defense table, showing the first genuine fear observers had seen from him. His hands trembled as the jury foreman stood. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Coleman asked. We have, Your Honor. The tension was electric. The bailiff carried the verdict forms to the judge, who reviewed them briefly before instructing the foreman to read them aloud. In the matter of the state of Texas versus Noah James Alberts, on the charge of capital murder in the death of Tiffany Marie Alberts, we the jury find the defendant guilty. Tiffany's mother sobbed openly, her husband gripping her hand. On the charge of capital murder in the death of Jonathan Paul Alberts, we the jury find the defendant guilty. Noah's head dropped. On the charge of capital murder in the death of Dileia Grace Alberts, we the jury find the defendant guilty. 3 guilty verdicts for 3 stolen lives. The trial now proceeded to the penalty phase. Under Texas law, the jury had to answer 3 special issues: whether Noah deliberately caused the deaths, whether he posed a continuing threat to society, and whether sufficient mitigating circumstances existed to warrant life imprisonment. The penalty phase testimony was brief but powerful. Dr. Sarah Martinez explained that Noah's narcissistic personality disorder was essentially fixed. He would always view people as objects to be used or eliminated. He posed an extreme danger, particularly to women and those vulnerable to him. The most impactful testimony came from Carol and David Morrison, Tiffany's parents, in their victim impact statements. Carol spoke through tears about missing her daughter every day, about the milestones she'd never share. Noah didn't just kill my daughter, she said, her voice breaking. He killed my grandchildren. He killed our future. And he showed no remorse, not one tear of genuine grief. Evidence of Noah's behavior since arrest showed his continuing lack of remorse. A jail guard recounted Noah saying, "Those kids were going to ruin my life anyway. At least now I don't have to pretend to care about their stupid school projects." The statement, made casually while requesting extra commissary privileges, showed Noah's complete absence of parental feeling or human empathy. Morrison's penalty phase closing argued passionately that executing Noah wouldn't bring back his victims, that life imprisonment would adequately protect society. But it fundamentally asked the jury to show Noah mercy he'd never shown his own children. Stewart's rebuttal was devastating. Noah Alberts chose to murder his 7-year-old son, chose to smother his 8-month-old daughter, chose to bludgeon his wife to death. Each choice revealed who he is. The question isn't whether he deserves death. The question is whether society deserves protection from him. The jury deliberated on the special issues for 8 hours. Their answers condemned Noah to death. Did he deliberately cause the deaths? Yes, unanimously. Does he pose a continuing threat? Yes, unanimously. Are there sufficient mitigating circumstances for life imprisonment? No, 11-1. The formal sentencing hearing was scheduled for April 23, 2024. When that day came, Judge Coleman asked if Noah wished to make a statement. Against his attorney's advice, he chose to speak. He started with what seemed like prepared remorse, but then his narcissism took over. "I loved my family," he said, his voice rising with indignation. "Tiffany didn't appreciate everything I did. She forced my hand." The courtroom erupted again. Judge Coleman's response was pointed. "Mr. Alberts, your statement has demonstrated exactly why this jury was correct. You've shown no genuine remorse, no understanding of your crimes, no acceptance of responsibility. You murdered your 7-year-old son, your infant daughter, and your wife. And even now you blame everyone but yourself." She then formally pronounced sentence. "Noah James Alberts, I hereby sentence you to death by lethal injection for the murders of Jonathan Paul Alberts and Dileia Grace Alberts." The words hung in the air with terrible finality. Noah would die for his crimes. Whether in 5 years or 25, whether by injection or old age while awaiting execution, he would die in prison. Justice, imperfect and painful, had been served. The metal door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through the concrete corridor. Noah Alberts was no longer a defendant. He was no longer a regional manager, a husband, a father. He was inmate #2024-1847, condemned to death, now residing in a 6-by-10-foot cell on death row at the Polunsky unit in Livingston, Texas. Death row in Texas is designed for maximum security and minimum contact. 23 hours a day in a cell. 1 hour for recreation in a slightly larger cage. No contact visits. No communal activities. Just isolation, monotony, and the slow passage of time while appeals crawl through the court system. For a narcissist like Noah, someone who craved attention, control, and validation, this isolation was its own form of torture. But it was nothing compared to the terror his children had experienced in their final moments. The prison psychologist who conducted Noah's intake evaluation noted something chilling. Noah showed no signs of depression or suicidal ideation despite his death sentence. Instead, he expressed confidence that his appeals would succeed, that the stupid jury had made a mistake. Even facing death, Noah couldn't accept responsibility or grasp the finality of his situation. The automatic appeals process began immediately. Noah's appellate attorneys, different from his trial team but equally dedicated to their ethical obligations, filed a comprehensive direct appeal to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals in June 2024. The appeal argued 47 different claimed errors, from routine challenges about jury instructions to fundamental constitutional attacks on the death penalty itself. The most substantive claims focused on the admission of the ring camera footage and alleged juror misconduct. The prosecution's response, filed in August 2024, systematically demolished each argument. Diana Stewart demonstrated that the ring camera had captured only areas visible from a public street, where Noah had no expectation of privacy, that the juror issue had been fully explored during voir dire, that each jury instruction had been proper under Texas law. The response brief was 287 pages of detailed legal analysis, but its conclusion was simple. The trial had been conducted fairly. The evidence of guilt was overwhelming. The death sentence should be affirmed. Legal experts predicted the Court of Criminal Appeals would affirm, likely without oral argument, given the strength of the prosecution's case. While appeals proceeded through the courts, life on death row developed its own grim rhythm for Noah. He received mail from disturbing individuals attracted to notorious killers, and from people sending graphic descriptions of what they hoped his execution would feel like. Noah responded to some letters, particularly those from women who claimed to love him despite his crimes. His letters showed no remorse for his crimes, but extensive self-pity about his confinement. He complained about food quality and made grandiose predictions of his eventual exoneration. Noah's parents visited twice in his first year on death row. Both visits were marked by tension. Patricia had testified at trial about Noah's difficult childhood, but her relationship with her son had been strained for decades. During their first visit in July 2024, Noah spent the entire hour complaining about his lawyers, the jury, the judge, everyone but himself. He never once asked about his mother's well-being or acknowledged her pain. Patricia left in tears, telling the prison chaplain she didn't know if she could visit again. Noah's father, who'd abandoned the family when Noah was 12, made no attempt at contact. The one-year anniversary of the murders, August 15, 2024, was marked by memorial services in Austin for Tiffany, Jonathan, and Dileia. Hundreds attended, the community gathering not just to mourn but to recommit to preventing similar tragedies. Tiffany's family had created a foundation in her name, supporting domestic violence victims and funding safe houses, legal services, and counseling programs. Carol Morrison spoke at events, sharing her daughter's story, urging women to take warning signs seriously. Her advocacy gave purpose to grief that otherwise threatened to consume her. On death row, Noah marked the anniversary alone. Guards reported he spent the day reading and watching television. No acknowledgement of the date. No recognition of what he destroyed exactly 1 year earlier. The prison chaplain, who made regular rounds offering spiritual counsel to condemned inmates, found Noah completely uninterested in questions of redemption or preparation for death. He talks about his appeals like it's a game he's going to win, the chaplain noted in his monthly report. There's no acceptance of responsibility, no genuine emotion about his victims. I've counseled hundreds of men facing execution, and I've never encountered anyone so completely disconnected from the reality of what they've done. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals issued its ruling on Noah's direct appeal in March 2025, affirming his conviction and death sentence in a 6-3 decision. The majority opinion methodically addressed and rejected each of Noah's 47 claimed errors, finding that the trial had been conducted properly and the evidence overwhelmingly supported the verdict. The opinion included particularly strong language about Noah's lack of remorse and his continued dangerousness, noting that even in prison, he'd attempted to intimidate witnesses and shown zero capacity for rehabilitation. Noah's attorneys immediately filed for rehearing, largely a pro forma motion that was denied in April 2025. The next step was federal habeas corpus appeals, a process that could take another 5 to 10 years. They filed their federal habeas petition in May 2025, raising many of the same issues rejected by state courts, plus new federal constitutional claims. Each argument was sincere and professionally presented, but federal courts in Texas had proven even less receptive to death penalty challenges than state courts. As Noah's legal proceedings ground forward, the families he destroyed continued their difficult journey towards something resembling peace. The community impacts of the case extended beyond individual families to institutional changes. The Austin Police Department's new training on family annihilation risk factors was already paying dividends. Officers identifying warning signs earlier, intervening before situations escalated to violence. The district attorney's specialized domestic violence unit was securing convictions in cases that previously might have fallen through the cracks. Schools' education about healthy relationships was giving young people tools to recognize abuse patterns before they became victims or perpetrators. Each change represented a small step toward preventing the next tragedy. By late 2025, Noah had been on death row for over a year. His appeals were progressing through their slow institutional rhythm. His daily existence was marked by the monotony of solitary confinement. He'd gained weight from lack of exercise, lost some of his carefully maintained appearance. His few remaining supporters dwindled as years passed without the exoneration he'd promised. Most true crime enthusiasts moved on to newer cases. Noah's story had been told, his guilt established beyond doubt, his punishment determined. All that remained was waiting, for appeals to exhaust, for an execution date to be set, for Texas to carry out the sentence its jury had imposed. The reality is that Noah could spend decades on death row before execution. The appeals process is lengthy by design, ensuring that no innocent person is executed, giving every condemned inmate multiple opportunities to challenge their conviction. But for Noah, whose guilt was irrefutable, the appeals were essentially formalities. Barring some unforeseen legal development, he would eventually die by lethal injection for murdering his wife and children. Or he might die of natural causes while awaiting execution: heart attack, cancer, old age. Either way, he would die in prison, never again walking free, never again threatening innocent people. His children, whose murders had earned him this fate, would never be forgotten. Their names are spoken at memorial services, their photos displayed in their grandparents' home, their loss mourned by a community that had never known them but grieved for them nonetheless. Justice had been served in the only way the legal system knew how, through conviction, condemnation, and the promise that Noah Alberts would pay with his life for the 3 innocent lives he'd stolen. It wasn't restoration. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't healing. But it was justice. And perhaps that's all anyone can hope for when faced with evil this profound. What can we learn from this tragedy? The Noah Alberts case isn't just a story about one man's evil. It's a case study in the warning signs of domestic violence, the dangers of narcissistic abuse, and the importance of believing victims when they express fear. Tiffany told her friend she was scared. She recognized that Noah's reaction to the divorce papers was dangerous. She was planning to take the children to her parents' house that weekend, but she didn't have enough time. The statistics are sobering. The most dangerous time for a domestic violence victim is when they try to leave. That's when abusers realize they're losing control, and for narcissists like Noah, that loss of control can trigger homicidal rage. If you or someone you know is in a relationship with a controlling, abusive, or narcissistic partner, please recognize the warning signs: isolation from friends and family, monitoring of phone, email, or movements, controlling behavior disguised as concern, rage when challenged or contradicted, threats about custody or finances, sudden calmness after explosive anger. This can indicate they're planning something. Organizations like the National Domestic Violence Hotline 1-800-799-7233 provide confidential support, safety planning, and resources for people trying to leave dangerous situations safely. Tiffany's legacy lives on through the foundation her family created, through the lives saved by better training and intervention, through the awareness raised by her story. Jonathan and Dileia's legacy is a reminder that children are the most innocent victims of domestic violence. They don't choose their parents. They can't escape dangerous situations they trust completely. Their death should haunt us, should motivate us, should remind us why this work matters. As for Noah Alberts, he sits in his cell on death row, stripped of everything that mattered to his narcissistic identity. No more control, no more audience, no more victims, just isolation, monotony, and the slow passage of time until Texas carries out the sentence he earned by murdering his own family. That's not tragedy. That's justice.